Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today, by very popular demand, we will be reviewing every single studio album from American death metal legends and icons, Cannibal Corpse. I honestly thought that the results would be a lot more even, because there has been a equal amount of demand for Gojira, Avenged Sevenfold to be featured in reviewing every album's style videos. Clearly I was very wrong to assume such a thing, because Cannibal Corpse absolutely slaughtered the competition and then proceeded to put said competition on display, mangled and torn to bits, in a fashion befitting of a Cannibal Corpse album cover. As per the norm with these videos, I am not interested in EPs, demos, live albums, or compilations, nor am I interested in anything released by a solo project or a side project. We are looking exclusively at Cannibal Corpse and exclusively at all of their studio albums. I will be talking about each album in order of release, assigning each a score out of 5, and I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because this band has a ton of records, and at a certain point, they do kind of all start to sound the same. In a good way for the most part, but nonetheless, I don't really feel like spending 30 minutes repeating myself over and over. With all that in mind, let's officially get started with Eaten Back to Life, released August 17th, 1990 via Metal Blade Records. This is the band's official debut album, and it's fine. Yeah, don't get me wrong, this thing is aggressive and brutal, and it's filled with all the gore and camp and violence that we've come to expect and love and want from Cannibal Corpse, but I don't know, it just lacks the sharpness, it lacks the precision, and it lacks the really great songcraft of some other records from this era of Cannibal Corpse. Like, there's not really anything on here that gets me pumped the way that stuff like I Come Blood or Fucked with a Knife or Hammer Smashed Face does. There's nothing here that has a lot of, like, real impact outside of the shock factor. The riffs do have a bit of an extreme thrashy momentum to them that I kind of enjoy and appreciate, reminiscent of, like, Creator's Pleasure to Kill, or even, like, the very first Def record, Scream Bloody Gore, and some other, like, demos and tapes that were kind of floating around in that late 80s extreme metal scene. And that definitely helps to elevate some tracks on here, like Put Them to Death and Skull Full of Maggots, but it's not quite enough. I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5, I guess leaning towards a 3. I mean, it's a totally serviceable, listenable piece of, like, really old school 90s death metal. It's not, like, horrible, it's just not really that interesting or spectacular or even brutal by the standards of what Cannibal Corpse would later go on to do, or even by the standards of what was happening in death metal at the time of this album's release. Yeah, that's it. It's fine. Whatever. Next up, we have Butchered at Birth, released July 1st, 1991 via Metal Blade Records. Once again, this is the band's sophomore studio album. It is also one of their most iconic, one of their most popular, one of their most influential, and in my opinion, one of their best still to this day. What a massive improvement in sound, in style, in the quality and consistency of the songwriting. I mean, this comes out really only a year after Eaten Back to Life, and it honestly feels like it was put together by a different band. Chris Barnes' vocals are a lot lower and a lot more menacing and gruesome. The riffs are a lot tighter, they have a lot more impact. Everything is more violent, more malicious, more evil, more gross. The bass actually has a nice, earthy, slimy tone to it. The drums are brutal, the guitars have real muscle and weight behind them. Obviously, Scott Burns is an incredible producer. Obviously, he's produced classic records for Obituary, Sepultura, Napalm Death, and many, many more. Honestly, I think this is one of his best works. I mean, this album for me kind of defines the sound of like classic 90s death metal more so than anything from Death, Suffocation, so on and so forth. Like, it's just so brutal, but despite that, everything sounds so good. Like, everything is crisp and punchy and dynamic and honestly kind of clean. It's everything is transparent in the forefront of the sound. And the songs are just great, like Meat Hook Sodomy, Gutted, Under Rotting Flash, Innards Decay, the title track, Butchered at Birth. There's just so many good, greasy, tasty fucking jams. 4 to 5 for me. This thing's fucking great. An essential American death metal record. One of Cannibal Corpse's best from this era of Cannibal Corpse. Honestly, one of the best records that Chris Barnes has ever performed on. I know we make fun of Chris Barnes a lot on this fucking channel for obvious reasons, but honestly, I think he's kind of in top form here. Say what you will about the man, but, you know, he kind of kills it with this early Cannibal Corpse stuff. Next up, we have Tomb of the Mutilated, released September 22nd, 1992, once again via Metal Blade Records. Honestly, you can probably copy and paste a lot of what I just said about Butchered at Birth and apply it here, and I don't think anyone would argue or complain or interrupt. I mean, this album is just as good for a lot of, if not all of, the same reasons as Butchered at Birth. It is gorier, it is somehow gorier and more lyrically extreme in a lot of ways. The album is borderline obsessed, specifically with, like, extreme sadism and necrophilia. There's a lot of stuff here that's, like, heavily inspired by real life murder and crime and violence as well. In an issue of Decibel magazine from June 2008, Chris Barnes noted that Entrails Ripped from a Virgin's Cunt was based on two brothers, one of whom was semi-disabled, that were serving a life prison sentence. The track Addicted to Vaginal Skin opens with the taped confession of the Genesee River killer Arthur Shawcross. This album also features some of the band's biggest hits, like the aforementioned Entrails Ripped from a Virgin's Cunt, as well as I Come Blood and Hammer Smashed Face. If you loved Butchered at Birth, there's no reason not to love this record. It's essentially everything that album did so well, but more, and based kind of, sort of, occasionally in reality. So I'm feeling another strong 4 to 5. It's another great record. Plain and simple. Next up, we have The Bleeding, released April 12th, 1994, once again via Metal Blade Records, and unsurprisingly, another great fucking album. This would end up being Chris Barnes' final album with Cannibal Corpse. This would also show a bit of a departure in sound for the band, with some more kind of groove-laden, intricate riffery and songwriting. There's a change in speed and dynamics. I mean, it's not, like, mind-blowingly different. It's still very obviously Cannibal Corpse, but Cannibal Corpse, dare I say, with a touch more nuance. Like, Chris Barnes actually tried to make it so that his vocals and his lyrics were decipherable, so that they could be understood by the average person. The riffs have a little bit of a melodic flair to them, and, you know, they're a little bit better crafted and written. It's not just a bunch of endless pummeling. I do think that the production takes a bit of a hit. This isn't quite as well made or put together as Butchered at Birth or Tomb of the Mutilated, in my opinion, but it still sounds really good. Like, everything has a nice crispy, crunchy feel to it. Everything is gross and covered in scabs and blood and you know, everything that we kind of expect from Cannibal Corpse. Almost 30 years later, stuff like Fucked with a Knife, Stripped, Raped, and Strangled, The Pixac Murders, The Bleeding, and so many more, they still hit goddamn hard. Another 4 to 5 for me, this time leaning slightly towards a 4.5 to 5. It's a fucking great record. Unfortunately, after this, Chris Barnes would leave the band and also descend into mediocrity, to be polite, with 6 Feet Under. But hey, fuck it. We're not here to talk about 6 Feet Under. We're here to talk about Cannibal Corpse. Next up, we have Vile, released May 21st, 1996, once again via Metal Blade Records. I'm now realizing that every single Cannibal Corpse record was released through Metal Blade Records. Good for Metal Blade. Never letting these motherfuckers go. That's smart. This would be the band's first studio album with George Fisher, more commonly referred to as Corpse Grinder on vocals, and it's fine. It's okay. Yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but this record has never really resonated with me. I can't even really put my finger on it after all of these years, because, I mean, it has a lot of the more intricate and technical and complex songcraft and writing of the Bleeding. It's still very brutal. It's well-produced. And, like, you know, George Fisher sounds great. Duh. And yet, it just doesn't really work for me. I don't know. Nothing really comes together in, like, a really cohesive and satisfying fashion. It kind of feels like the band unsure of what to do next. I mean, Chris Barnes is responsible for so much of the band's direction up until this point, and as such, they're just kind of going through the motions and doing what is expected with them. It makes for music that is serviceable, listenable, but not necessarily memorable. And with that in mind, I would hold this up to the level of something like Eaten Back to Life as opposed to The Bleeding or Tomb of the Mutilated and so on and so forth. I will concede that if I had to pick between this or Eaten Back to Life, I would pick this, because I think Corpse Grinder, at this point, is a better vocalist than Barnes was on Eaten Back to Life. And the music is still, like, mostly pretty well written and performed. It's still mostly pretty well produced and put together. It's just not, like, really wowing me, you know? It's not thrilling me the way that, the past few Cannibal Corpse records have. I'm feeling a 3 out of 5, I guess leaning towards a 2.5 out of 5. It's decent. It's totally fine to listen to, just not really super amazingly fun, I guess. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of phoning it in with this part of the review, but then again, I feel like Cannibal Corpse phoned it in a little bit with this album, so it works out in a weird kind of way. Next up, we have Gallery of Suicide, released April 21st, 1998, once again via Metal Blade Records. A very important album in the Cannibal Corpse discography for a couple of reasons. This is the band's first album with Pat O'Brien on guitar, and also their first album to be made without the help and the guidance of one Scott Burns. And both of these things have had a colossal impact on the sound of Cannibal Corpse, on the sound of Gallery of Suicide, arguably more so than the loss of Chris Barnes. I mean, holy shit. Pat O'Brien is often credited with bringing a lot more technicality into the sound of Cannibal Corpse, and that's definitely true, and that's definitely on display across this record. There are a lot of manic and frantic and frenzied riffs and arrangements everywhere. It's not like full-blown tech deaf or anything like that, but I don't know, if you were to, like, do, like, really early Atheist and filter that through Cannibal Corpse, maybe it would sound a little bit like some of these riffs and arrangements and such. I don't know, maybe I'm just going crazy. The point is, there are lots of crazy riffs, and that's great. George Fisher also sounding way more comfortable, way more confident here, but goddamn this production. I mean, wow, the bass is buried, the guitars sound like people like having a lightsaber fight but with like rusty chainsaws. The drums have like very little impact whatsoever. George's vocals are a little too high in the mix. I mean, it's not like a disgusting, horrendous mess, but like, damn, coming hot off the heels of a slew of records that defined the sound of death metal, that perfected the sound of death metal. You know, the loss of Scott Burns is, wow, it's, yeah. I'm feeling a 3 out of 5 on this. There's still some tasty jams to be found on here, Sentence to Burn, I Will Kill You, so on and so forth. But yeah, nothing on par with what we were hearing before. You know, Jim Morris, no disrespect to the guy, but he ain't no Scott Burns, and that is clear as goddamn day on this thing. Next up, we have Bloodthirst, released October 19th, 1999 via Metal Blade Records, and holy shit, what an accurate title. This thing is hella gnarly and hella brutal. I mean, this thing just goes straight for the goddamn jugular. We're starting to see the transition now from, like, the 90s Cannibal Corpse into the 2000s Cannibal Corpse that would go on to make records like Kill and so on and so forth. The riffs have so much goddamn fucking firepower. The drums sound massive. The bass has a nice, earthy, dark presence. Corpse Grinder practically exploding out of the forefront of the sound without really overshadowing anyone or anything, without overwhelming. So many great fucking songs on here, like Pounded into Dust, Dead Human Collection, Unleashing the Bloodthirsty, the Spine Splitter, Hacksaw Decapitation, Blowtorch Slaughter. It's just constantly brutal and gross and hella violent, hyper-violent, extremely in-your-face violent. It really feels like somebody lit a fucking fire under these guys' ass. I definitely thank producer Colin Richardson for that. He has breathed so much life and so much energy into Cannibal Corpse through this album. Definitely feels like Cannibal Corpse were paying very close attention to the mistakes and the failures of the last two albums. This thing is bigger, bolder, better, more dynamic in every single way than Vile, than Gallery of Suicide. I'm feeling a solid 4 out of 5 on this bad boy. Next up, we have Gore Obsessed, released February 26th, 2002 via Metal Blade Records. Honestly, you can copy and paste a lot of what I just said about Bloodthirst and apply it here, and once again, no one's going to interrupt or complain or anything like that. You know, it's just as brutal, just as heavy, just as in your fucking face, just as aggressive. The one thing I will say, this album has a bit of a different vibe. Like, it kind of seeks to combine the aggressive guitar tone and, like, the explosive elements of Bloodthirst with the more kind of classic Scott Burns style death metal production. You know, like the drums and the bass feel more in line with what we heard on Butchered at Birth and Tomb of the Mutilated, sonically speaking, whereas the riffs and especially George's vocals are like just really loud and aggressive, much like the aforementioned Bloodthirst. It definitely has more body to it, but I feel like Bloodthirst overall just has more energy and more brutality, which at this point is kind of what I really want from a Cannibal Corpse record, you know what I mean? Like, it's great to have, like, nuance and, you know, like, really organic, rich production and, like, clever lyrics and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, none of that matters if you don't have the really fucking brutal sound. And this does have a brutal sound, but not like the brutal sound. I don't know, I hope that makes sense. Still though, great album. I mean, Savage Butchery, Pit of Zombies, Dormant Bodies Bursting, Hatchet to the Head. I would pick Bloodthirst over this album, but I would still probably give this album a 4 out of 5, I guess, maybe leaning towards a 3.5 out of 5. Next up, we have The Wretched Spawn, released February 24th, 2004, once again via Metal Blade Records. Once again, a fucking really good album. Honestly, we're officially reaching that point where Cannibal Corpse is getting really consistent, and a lot of their albums are starting to sound the same, starting to feel the same, flow the same, but no one's really arguing because it's consistently pretty good. And The Wretched Spawn is no exception. It's punchy, it's crisp, it's all the other words that we've used to describe Cannibal Corpse throughout this video. The production is a little bit more clear while being a little bit more beefy. I think it's a better execution of what Gore Obsessed was trying to do with that in mind. So much great riffing, like I love those slower stomping grooves of the title track, The Wretched Spawn, the insane technical frenzied guitar work of Frantic Disembowelment, which, I mean, to this day is considered one of their most complex and technical songs on any record, as well as like Severed Head Stoning, Blunt Force Castration. It's a great fucking album. 4 out of 5. Duh. At this point, I feel like Cannibal Corpse can't do any wrong. They'd have to try. They'd have to go out of their way to do wrong. They're just that good at what they fucking do. Next up, we have Kill, released October 21st, 2009, once again via Metal Blade Records. Holy shit, what an awesome fucking album. This kind of feels like a combination, a smorgasbord, if you will, of everything we've talked about from the corpse grinder era of Cannibal Corpse, you know? The brutal guitar tones, the more complex guitar work, George's gnarly vocals, you know, the production. It feels like all of it's been brought here, all of it's been refined and fine-tuned and fixed up and polished, and you know, all the edges have been sanded, everything's been figured the fuck out, we know where everything is supposed to go, we've got our mise en place ready, everything's in place, all we gotta do is execute, all we gotta do is kill. Hence the title. That's exactly what Cannibal Corpse does. Holy shit, this album fucking rules. This album launches brutal death metal savagery at you with the power and the speed of motherfucking Superman. The production is amazing thanks to Eric Rutan. I mean, the bass, the drums, the guitars, the vocals, everything sounds massive, larger than life. It's death metal rising from the depths of hell. So many great songs on here. Death Walking Terror, The Time to Kill Is Now, Make Them Suffer, which still to this day is one of my favorite Cannibal Corpse songs. Like, we're talking top 5 territory. Everything about that, it's just this anthemic, like, death metal rager of epic proportions. If you aren't raging like a motherfucker the moment that song starts, I legitimately don't trust you, and I don't think you know how to have fun, because you've probably never had it. Even the simplicity of the album cover, I honestly think is great, you know? Like, there's no cartoonishly stupid, over-the-top gore and violence. It's just kill in big black letters with some blood dripping off of it. That's kind of great. That kind of hits. That kind of slaps. That kind of serves. Solid 4.5 out of 5 for me. Holy shit. It's fucking fantastic. It's fucking incredible. Honestly, one of Cannibal Corpse's best albums. Like, I think this thing fucking rules hard. Next up, we have Evisceration Plague, released February 2nd, 2009, once again via Metal Blade Records. I don't really have a ton to say about this album. It's once again Cannibal Corpse doing what they do so goddamn well at this point. Eric Rutan sticking around to produce this one, but going for a bit more of an old school death metal kind of vibe and sound with like very punchy, transparent percussion, in the vein more so of what Scott Burns would do and did on records like Butchered at Birth, Tomb of the Mutilated, blah blah blah. The songs, in my opinion, aren't as powerful, they aren't as crushing, they aren't as evil and heavy, but, I mean, it's still, like, really well-written shit. There's still a lot of great songs on here, a lot of great riffs, a lot of great solos and beats, and roaring vocal displays from George Fisher. I really don't have a ton to say. Like I said before, we're starting to reach that point where every Cannibal Corpse album is more or less the same, varying degrees of quality, but in a lot of ways, you know, more or less the same, and I don't really like repeating myself. I don't care much for repeating myself. I'm just going to give this a 3.5 out of 5. I don't think it's as strong as Kill, but it is still a damn good record. Next up, Torture, released March 13th, 2012 via Metal Blade Records. Same thing. It's Cannibal Corpse doing what they do, man. Like, what do you guys want me to say, man? By this point, Cannibal Corpse know who they are, they're comfortable with who they are, they know what they want to do, and they know what people want to hear, and they just keep doing it. I don't have anything to add. If you liked the last album, if you like Cannibal Corpse in general, you're probably gonna like this album. Production-wise, I would say this kind of finds a sweet spot in between you know, Evisceration, Plague, and Kill. That's something kind of different, I guess. Sure. Yeah, it's Cannibal Corpse. 3.5 out of 5. Still a good record. Still a good record. Next up, we have a Skeletal Domain, released February 16th, 2014, once again via Metal Blade Records. A bit of a change in producer this time around. We have Mark Lewis, and honestly, this is Cannibal Corpse's best modern album, in my opinion. Some of the band's most interesting songwriting in a long time. There were parts of this record that I thought were just earth-shatteringly brutal and genuinely kind of unpredictable, like these vicious breakdowns that come out of nowhere, like roaring guitars and tempo changes, and, you know, the songs will change quite a bit while still, you know, holding true to what we know and love and expect from Cannibal Corpse. The songs themselves, just fucking fantastic. High Velocity Impact Splatter is one of the best album openers on any Cannibal Corpse record, in my opinion. I love the title track, Headlong into Carnage, The Murderous Pact, Ice Pick Lobotomy, Bloodstained Cement, Killer Become, which has an absurdly awesome chorus. I would argue this song is as catchy and as awesome as Make Them Suffer. There's a little bit more grit and dirt to this. Like, this comes dangerously close to, like, a Dying Fetus or, like, some 2000s cattle decapitation, in my opinion. I mean, it's just so brutal in so many ways. I guess that's probably where this doesn't feel like a Cannibal Corpse album, but in a good way. Mark Lewis found a way to make the familiar feel new and different and fresh and cool again, which is fucking awesome. Solid 4.5 out of 5 for me. Another incredible record from Cannibal Corpse. I love this. Honestly, it's my favorite Cannibal Corpse record. One of my favorites. I feel like I've said that about a couple in this video. They have a lot of great records, but this is top of the totem pole, so yeah. Next up, we have Red Before Black, released November 3rd, 2017 via Metal Blade Records. Eric Rutan is back to produce. Cannibal Corpse have clearly taken notes on what worked well with Skeletal Domain, and they've combined it with what Eric Rutan had been doing so well with Cannibal Corpse up until Skeletal Domain. The result is something incredibly punchy, incredibly brutal, and incredibly Cannibal Corpse. You know, it's them doing what they do, but doing it better than how they were doing it on Evisceration, Plague, and Torture. I mean, honestly, this thing sounds like a serial killer on the fucking loose. I mean, Code of the Slashers, Only One Will Die, the title track, Red Before Black. It really is fantastic. I think Pat O'Brien, in retrospect, on some level, knew that this was going to be his final album of the band, because he just lets loose a ton of crazy, wild riffs and solos. 4 to 5, it's great, it's Cannibal Corpse. What more do you need to know? And finally, this brings us to Violence Unimagined, released April 21st, 2021, once again via Metal Blade Records. Eric Rutan pulling double duty on this one as a producer and as their new guitarist, filling in for the aforementioned Pat O'Brien. An excellent choice in my opinion. I mean, this is a guy who's collaborated with Cannibal Corpse for a few years, for a few albums now, as we've been talking about. He's also, you know, worked closely with Morbid Angel and his own band, Hate Eternal, so excellent fucking choice. He does a great job across this record and is a big reason as to why this thing is as good as it is. He clearly understands the sound and the vibe that Cannibal Corpse wants, that the fans want, and he just fucking executes it with 110% passion and skill and professionalism. And the rest of Cannibal Corpse just do what they do, and that's fine, that's great, because they're still so good at what they do. I honestly, we haven't really talked about it, but I can't really think of another band that can literally make the same album over and over again and still have it be this good and this fun. A lot of great songs on here. Murderous Rampage, Inhuman Harvest, Ritual Annihilation, Follow the Blood, Over Torture. It's just fucking great, man. I really am truly running out of things to say about this band and how good each album is. They're all just fucking good. Every Cannibal Corpse is fucking good. All of them. Even the not great ones are still kinda good. 4 to 5, great album. I guess leaning maybe towards a 3.5 out of 5. I did feel when this album came out that it definitely maybe felt like Cannibal Corpse were running out of tricks, but I mean, the tricks they keep using, as we've said so many times, are still so fucking good and still so entertaining, so fuck it! And I think that'll do it for me here. That's reviewing every Cannibal Corpse album. I apologize if at a certain point it, you know, if I started repeating myself. I tried not to, but it's difficult because Cannibal Corpse repeat themselves so often. But, you know, again, they're still so good at it. Now it's your turn to tell me, how would you score each record from Cannibal Corpse? How would you rank them? What's your favorite album? What's your least favorite album? Let me know. Share some dank-ass Chris Barnes memes while you're at it. Why not? Thank you for watching. Press this button to subscribe. Look, there's more videos here. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.